I've been chasing all these dreams, I'm getting very close. Your work shouldn't feel like work if you really love it. If you set and you know your worth, then think if it's worth it. But I do count my blessings first, so you know I'm grateful every night. But watch me, baby, I'ma take it there. Tell ya I'ma stay the path. Tell ya I've been chasing all these dreams, I'm getting very close. Here we go. Your work shouldn't feel like work if you really love it. If you set and you know your worth, then think if it's worth it. But I do count my blessings first, so you know I'm grateful every night.
Welcome to the Mind Growth Mission Podcast. I have a guest I'm truly honored and humbled by, Adam Howland, who most recently was Lieutenant Colonel of the Space Force, and now he's moving to a advisor role for the State Department, military advisor. So he's climbed up the ranks in military, and he's led troops from afar and been deployed several times, and many awards and decorations I'm seeing here, and just an amazing human. And I'm honored and humbled by this once again, man. So welcome to the show, Adam.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, man.
And Adam, we were just talking, you're commuting to the Whitehouse every day. Tell me the funny story if everybody can hear it.
Sure.
If it's not classified.
It's absolutely not. So I, during one of my deployments, the Secretary of Defense wanted to meet with the senior military leaders from Afghanistan. And because that's where I was part of the team that brought them here to speak with the Secretary of Defense. This would have been 2015. Well, because I live in the area, I didn't stay in a hotel. I stayed at my family's home in Stafford. And so I drove up from Stafford to the Pentagon. And the first day back, I took some commuters with me so that we could use the free high occupancy lanes. And man, I made great time. I'm talking like it's about a 45-minute drive, and I think we made it in 34 or 35 minutes. And as we got to the Pentagon, which is not too terribly fast, but when we got to the Pentagon, one of the gentlemen who was sitting in the back, he put his hand on my shoulder. He goes, "You know what? I was a combat pilot in the Air Force for 23 years, and your drive terrified me." I guess that I was driving a lot like we drive when we're in convoys, which is driving fast and close. And I definitely developed a bad habit there of not liking people to pass me to the right or on the left. And so I told my wife about that, and she chuckled and she goes, "Yeah, it's been pretty scary with you the last day or so." And so the next day I went back up again. And the same guy was in the vehicle, and I recognized him. I adjusted my driving technique there. I slowed down a little bit, didn't follow as close, and definitely was not passing people or letting people pass me. And he put his hand on my shoulder that second time, and he said, "You know, that was a much better ride today." I'm like, "Yes, I got it." I talked with my wife about it. So, you know, it's that kind of thing, right? I mean, if we're talking about mind growth and about how we have to do better, I mean, I think one of the challenges that we all have is to exhibit enough humility to take feedback and to make immediate change, because sometimes immediate change is what's required. And in that instance, like, I needed people to be in that vehicle with me so that I could not pay the $23 and fare it took to go the fast lanes up to DC.
Now you bring up an awesome point too. Like, with military and the deployments, you're out there for so long and you get so acquainted to what you're used to out there, and then you come over here and you're like, what is life here again? You know, you have to readjust. So a lot of things in life can get like that, where they consume you, and then what happens, right? Like, I was listening to a podcast earlier. It was talking about how some athletes, they've been training for so long, so once they retire, they just let themselves go, right? And then others go, you know, just as hard, because that's just how they are, so to speak. But for everybody, it's different, that adjustment period and the cycles for that even. But tell me, I mean, you've been involved with so much, obviously with the, the Air Force and Space Force, and now you're working in the White House. But what are some of these qualities and leaders you've met along the way that you can say inspire you or that you look up to?
Well, I'll mention, if I can, I'll mention two by name. One of them was retired Major General Marty Whalen, and the second is retired Lieutenant General Bill LaQuarrie. These two men, both significant influences in my life, and I speak of them because they're both retired. I'll mention a third, Colonel J. Fulmer. All of them very different leadership styles, all of them very different motivations, although I think there are probably some common threads if we were to pull on them enough. I'll mention two things here that I found in common with all of them that I think are essential to really and sit at the very essence of what being a leader is. The first is humility. All three of these men definitely have the quality of humility, the ability to understand where their limits are, to be clear about what those limits are at the very beginning of their interaction with someone, to not and to be willing to accept correction or to accept information or counsel from others is essential, especially as you progress in anywhere in life, right? The larger the organization, the deeper its pockets, the broader its scope of responsibility, you're going to quickly get out of your depth because none of us can know everything. There are very few Leonardo da Vinci's in the world, right? And so to surround yourself with people that you can trust and that you can learn and receive counsel from is really important. But to receive counsel. The second quality that all of them have in common that I believe is essential to a leader is the ability to make a decision, right? So especially in our world, and I think that you probably recognize this as well. I mean, when I entered the military 18 years ago, there was not a computer on every desk. Today, next week when I go back to work, I'm on vacation this week. Next week when I go back to work, I will carry 3 devices with me to work, right? And so that are my personal devices, and then I have a series of them that I use at work as well. What a change in the world! I mean, we are bombarded with information, and the reality is that, especially if you're a senior leader, or if you are trying to get started, like if you're at the very bottom or at the very top, you can swim in data all day long, but never make any sense of it. And to quote Dex from Star Wars Attack of the Clones Episode 2, he's like, there is a difference between knowledge and wisdom, and the difference is how we consume and filter data. And so all three of these leaders were humble enough to understand that they didn't know everything, but had the ability to consume information and to rapidly, with counsel, to rapidly identify what was the most important information and to focus on the most important information and let everything else take care of itself, because that's what your organization is helping with that.
Yeah. When I think of the military, I think of being super decisive, right? You have to make decisions in real time and really quick. And, that's something that has to get ingrained in you no matter what department you're a part of, right? So
sure.
That's a good point. So you said humility and decisiveness. What's the third? I know you.
Sure. So if I can say that there's a third, and then I'm going to say it this way. I'm going to call it wellness. All right. So they strive after wellness. Wellness takes a lot of different forms, right? Mm-hmm. Wellness can be spiritual wellness. It can be mental or social wellness. It can be emotional wellness. Obviously, it's physical wellness. And all three of these men found how to stay well, what it meant for them to be well, and would center themselves in it. General LaCory in particular was very good at this. He would have meetings sometimes, and obviously I was like the lowest ranking person that worked for him that would meet him regularly. And there would be times when I would come in and he would say, hey, I need a minute. And what he was doing is he was transitioning himself and recentering himself to be ready to receive what I was bringing. And that speaks to his state in a general sense, that he knew what it took to center himself so that he could be receptive when he needed to be receptive. And that is also something that I believe is a fleeting skill in our world today. I mean, our social media platforms are designed to give us short bits of information that are often either over exaggerated or oversimplified. And we consume 10, 15, 20 of these things in an hour or in a half an hour even. It does not create the depth of thinking that we need or the depth of wellness that we need to really reset ourselves, in my opinion. And so General LaCourrier in particular, I saw him do this on a number of occasions where he recentered himself. Then he was in a place where he could receive what needed to be done, and then he could be decisive, or he could say, yeah, I really don't understand this. I need to know more, but I don't have time now, or I do have time now, right? So he preserved his decision space by centering himself. And I call that wellness. That's what I called it when I was in command of the 319th Combat Training Squadron. And it served me well, and I know that it served others well. It definitely served General Corey well.
Love it. Thank you for those examples. And we spoke about it before, too, and I was asking you about some of your routines and stuff. What would you say you do for your personal wellness?
So my personal, so we talked offline about this, right? I have 6 children. My wife and I have 6 children, happily married. We just had our 19th date-iversary, as my youngest calls it. We celebrate the 19th anniversary of our very first date. We have 6 children. My children are late goers to bed. They're night owls like my wife is. I'm an early riser. You know, many 2 decades in the military has taught me to be an early riser. And so my morning routine starts generally very quiet. And I once watched a video or heard a podcast where this person basically said that they don't touch their phone for the first half an hour that they're awake. They allow themselves to walk through their routine for their day, to visualize what they're going to do, to write notes, to review things from the previous day, to write down the things that come to them in the early morning. And I do that every morning as well. The first 30 minutes of every one of my days is me walking through the things I need to get accomplished that day, to visualize what I'm going to do, the realities of it, right? I mean, if I know that I'm going to walk downstairs and there's a load of dishes that need to be done before I can get going, before I can feel good about sitting in that space and working, then I can visualize that and I know what that looks like. It's a little bit more challenging when I'm doing things that are new, right? Starting a new job just recently, I didn't know what to expect. And so, but I still had to visualize something, right? And so my morning routine is visualization of what's going on. And then I'm a man of faith. And so I take a few minutes to center myself with my God. And so between anchoring myself to him every morning and visualizing what I need to get done through the day, I'm more focused and I can recall that, right? So I can close my eyes midway through the day or a quarter of the way through the day when I'm taking a break or whatever. I'm like, okay, where am I? Am I where I need to be? Am I readjusting fires appropriately? Am I reprioritizing based on the status that I receive? And I'm not saying that I complete everything every day. In fact, far from it. But as a very wise leader once said, plans are worthless, but planning is invaluable, is priceless. And I believe that that's exactly what that visualization and that centering does.
Amazing. And as far as you doing these things consistently now, when do you think you picked them up?
Well, if so, like I said, I'm a man of faith, and when I got into high school, my father and mother impressed upon me the value of attending a theology class, a seminary, before school every single day. And so my day started at least an hour before all of my peers every single day of the school year. And so I probably learned to do that by attending that course. Obviously in the military, we do most of us do our our PT if it's not our job to be physically fit. Like it's my job to be fit enough to do my duty, but I'm not an operator the way that others are, where it's their job to be so physically fit that they can overcome and endure through some really rough situations. That's not my job. And so their job is to be fit. And so that's part of what they do. It's worked into their daily routine. But for me, mine starts in the morning. And so I've found that if I fuel my body appropriately and I get to the gym every day and I take this mental wellness time, that it does that. And it started. It probably started when I was in high school. I mean, I was an athlete in high school and college, so it was probably there that I developed it, and I've continually seen the fruits and the value of it. So I just haven't stopped, and that was, over 25 years ago. I mean, I graduated from high school 25 years ago. It makes me feel old to say that out loud. So that was almost 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's good.
No, I love it. I love reminiscing, and it seems like your parents had a huge influence on you, and we're lucky to have some amazing parents to do that for us, right? What are some other qualities you might have picked up from them growing up?
Well, let's see. I believe that my father has the gift of organization. That man could look at any problem, break it down into its component parts, and then reassemble a solution from those parts. He could organize anything. I mean, he worked for a nonprofit organization through most of my life. And I remember going into his office because he had his office in our home when we lived in Pennsylvania many, many years ago. And he had a box full of small bits, small parts that he used every day when he would go out and survey. He was a civil engineer, survey things. And I'm joking you not. He had 4 or 5 of these boxes, all of them labeled. Every single part, what it was called, was labeled, its size, its gauge, whatever it was, right? I mean, he over-organized. It's probably a little bit extreme even for me today, right? I don't label everything, but I label. I label, large things. Anyways, but so that organization is something that I definitely picked up from my father. Emotional intelligence is what I picked up from my mother. I'm the oldest of 5 children. And so I watched my mother through multiple moves and through the challenges that are introduced into a large family when the only breadwinner works for a nonprofit and doesn't make a ton of money. I watched her manage our home and manage my father in many regards and us children, and just exhibit a degree of emotional intelligence every minute of every day that I wanted to emulate. And one of the things that I think has served me very well as a commander twice, as a leader in the military, as a father of 6 myself, is balancing that emotional intelligence with the need to get things done, right? I mean, sometimes I think that people see emotional intelligence as just being willing to always demonstrate empathy or sympathy for people, but emotional intelligence is far deeper than that, because there's also a degree of understanding when to stress people, when to help them grow, right? So there's the other side of that emotional intelligence, and I saw my mother do that with us as children. And so I've tried to emulate some of the ways that she did that even now, although I don't know that all of it is applicable in the military. It's definitely applicable in the home.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. And they sound like amazing people. And I'm lucky to have parents that are kind of like that too. My dad was an engineer as well. So more of the organized, can put anything together type, hands-on, all that. And then my mom is more of the fun-loving one that can relate to anybody, and smiles all the time, and she loves just being around other people, and her interpersonal skills there are really high, I'd say. So some similarities that I'm hearing as you're saying all this, and emotional intelligence is a good way to put that as well, and that's stuff that you really have to work on, right? How to handle different situations, how to handle others, and how to be around different types. And when you're leading men, leading others, you've done so much work on yourself, but what did you have to realize maybe early on that, like, hey, in order for me to get to this next level, I need to get better, me personally, get better at this to become a great leader? For you,
Sure.
maybe
So,
early on, what was that like?
well, yeah. So, if I can, I'll share a story.
All right.
Um, my, when my children listen to this, they'll sort of groan internal to themselves because I share this story all the time. It has so many applications, right? I grew up, as I already mentioned, in Pennsylvania. That's where I started wrestling. All right, and so we can talk about wrestling in a second because I think that wrestling as a sport, not WWE, not the production that is basically the soap
The
opera.
technical wrestling.
That's right. The collegiate and Olympic wrestling,
Yes.
right? Um, so I was a wrestler, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But in the wrestling room where we wrestled when I was a boy, there are padded walls, and above the three walls were the words desire, dedication, and determination. These three D's. I'll say them again for you: desire,
Got it.
dedication, and determination.
Mm-hmm.
And my father added a fourth to it, and he said, dedication, determination, and desire lead to discipline.
Mm.
The result of that is discipline. In fact, my squadron has heard me say this many times too, because this is how I lead. But that's where it started, right? Is that for me as a person, my father talking about this when I was a boy helped me understand that everything I do starts with desire. Like I have to have an internal desire to do it.
Mm.
The reality is we can be compelled to do things, but then when no one else is watching, we may or may not do it, right? And there's a difference between dedication and determination, right? Dedication is understanding and setting something aside, whether it be your time, your talent, your money, whatever it is, to achieve something. Determination is what happens when you fail along the way. It's the picking yourself back up, right? All you have to do to complete a race is to get up one more time than you fall, right? Or to take one more step past the finish line, right? You choose your cliche, you choose your analogy. But it takes all three of those things to really be disciplined. And it takes those things to do it consistently, right? I mean, that's what dedication really speaks to in those three things. And so for me, and so now I'm going to talk about the wrestling aspect of it. What I've taken away after being a wrestler for a little over a dozen years was that every day in practice, the only person that could beat me was me. And on the mat, it was between me and one other person, and that was it. And it was the result of me, like my ability to conquer or be conquered on the mat was the result of a lot of different things. But the majority of it was how many times did I let me defeat me in practice? Because the reality is, if I was faster, stronger, and more determined than my opponent, I would win. And that's just the way it was. I mean, going hard for 6 minutes, there are very few people that can give 100% effort for 6 continuous minutes. And so if I was stronger, faster, and had more stamina than them, I could win a match. But I had to be determined to give 100% for those 6 minutes. And so I learned that as a boy, like in the single digits, right? Like 7 years old is when I started wrestling. And so I think that it was those 3 words: dedication, determination, and desire, and how that leads to discipline. And my father's incessant discussing that with us about how that meant more than just what was on the mat, but how it applied to our lives. And then the sport, my preferred sport, being so very uniquely individualistic, that helped build the thought process that I have on how I work in life. Now, I've had to learn some other things along the way, right? Because as we talked about, so much of our success as we continue to progress is based on the team that we surround ourselves with, or the team that we're given. And so how to inspire, motivate, and otherwise manage their efforts to produce a unified effect is a leadership challenge in and of itself, and it requires something more than just to be personally, internally motivated. But it has to start with that internal motivation. And your leaders absolutely, as leaders, we absolutely have to have that internal motivation. We can't
Mhm.
we can't live our lives being motivated by other people and expect to be at the highest levels of success, at the highest levels of performance. That is reserved, and I believe properly so, for those that are internally motivated and who can do the job by themselves if given enough time and effort and resources, but get it done faster by building a team around them.
So whenever you have like a down day or a day where you're not feeling like it's going to be my day, what do you do to kind of get you back up into that state, to be there to motivate others and lead others? Because every day we're challenged with different things, right? But there's some days where we're just not feeling it, man. So what do you do to kind of get through those days?
Well, I'm gonna throw a curveball. I'm gonna ask you to answer that question first. What do
Okay.
you
So for me, I mean, it's kind of like you. The practices we do with the routines kind of sets us up for success, right? But there's always stuff that can like hit us in the face. And then we just have to look at the perspective on it, right? Is it something that's going to affect me for the long term or just short term? And how much does that really mean? And how much is that really getting in the way? So, I mean, maybe analyzing it from that approach and really simplifying, like, hey, I can get through this. I've got through similar things before, and thinking about it that way. But for me, sometimes too, working out's a stress relief. So even if I worked out that day, maybe doing like 5-10 minutes something to just clear my head or do whatever. But no, I'm just thinking about it from a scale of what you've been involved with, to be on for so many days consecutively at times. There has to be some challenges and some things thrown in there that have really stood out for you. I mean, I'm looking at all your assignments here, deployments, teams you work with, things you've accomplished. And I mean, during all that, I know there were some bad days for Mr. Adam Howland here.
there were some bad days. So I don't think that I have one thing. I will
Yeah.
say that what I've learned about me is that I can evaluate myself pretty rapidly. Like because of the amount of introspection that I do every day, I've developed the skill of rapidly assessing what is throwing me off. Is it because my wife and I got into a disagreement in the morning? Is it because I've had a week of not accomplishing all of the administrative work that I need to do, and now I feel like I'm behind, and so I can't focus anymore on any one thing because I have all of these big things that I know that I have to accomplish, right? And so for me, resetting starts with evaluating what it is it's going to take to get back to good. To get well is the phrase that we use in the military. What's it going to take for me to get well? And once I know what it's going to take to get well, that's what I can do. That's when I can revert back to my routine. What do I do to get well? Like personally, how do I go to, what do I do to recenter? And I have a number of things that I can do just based on where I am, right? So in my office, I have a pull-up bar and I can do push-ups. And so I can hop on the pull-up bar and I can do pull-ups until my body can't pull anymore. Right? Or I can push until I go to fail. Or I can step out of the office and I can walk the yard. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can do those physical things. Just around the corner from my office space is a meditation room. So I can go and I can sit. If what it is emotionally challenging, is emotionally discharging, if you will, right? And I need to reset or refill myself there, then I can go to the meditation room and I can spend a few minutes in prayerful thought and thoughtful prayer to recenter. So it just depends for me,
Yeah.
and it really is very much engaged on what I think the actual problem is. If it's administrative, right? So we've all had those days where it's like, gosh, I just have to get these 3 reports done, right? Maybe it's not the report that's holding me up. Maybe I just need to answer an email, and answer a challenging email to my boss. Like, take the time to think through that, so, and because it's less work than doing that performance report or whatever it is. So now that I've done the small thing, now I can build back up to the bigger things, right?
Hmm.
And so resetting for me at least is very much tied to what the stumbling block is. Because if I can turn a stumbling block into a stepping stone, then the likelihood of it being a stumbling block again is reduced, or I can recover faster. It's just like being in the gym, right? The more times you do a bench press, the more times you do a deadlift, the more times you do a pull up, the faster your body can recover from that exercise to do more work. A similar thing applies, I think, in all aspects of our lives and in our relationships, right? The faster I can get to a point where I can be sincere with my spouse and say, hey, I really am sorry. Like, I realized that what I did was not thought out well, was inconsiderate, or I should have just asked first, right? As 3 examples of things that I say quite regularly. Um,
Oh,
the faster I can
these are
get
helpful. Thank you for all these examples.
there you go. But the point is it has to be sincere, right?
Hmm.
Because she picks up on that. And so the faster I can get to sincerity and then communicate that in a way that she understands that it's actually received, like it's actually communicated that it's sincere, the faster I can get about doing the things I need to do, because that's the stoppage. So clear the stoppage and then keep pressing.
Well, also as a leader, I think it's important to know how people receive things and how they perceive what you're
Yeah,
doing or saying, right? Like you have to learn how to work with them
yeah,
together because you might make a simple action that you think's right, but it might rub the other person the wrong way. And
sure,
so I guess that's a failing forward kind of technique that you have to adapt to, right?
yeah.
But you working with so many different types of people, what are some of those things that stood out? Maybe some conflict that you had to overcome? Because I know you are a linguist and had to go overseas to help that cultural gap
Mhm.
amongst the Americans and military forces and the Afghani people, for instance, and all that. So, what are some things that you picked up on to help, I guess, be more accustomed to people and the interactions and whatnot?
Well, so we talked about emotional intelligence. I think that's a
Yeah,
competency, right? It's an
yeah.
emotional competency. I believe there's a cultural competency. So if we're talking specifically about working with the Afghans or with foreign nationals, there's a competency of understanding your opposite. And I guess that's probably where it's applicable. But in this case, it's a foreign culture. I was fortunate in that there have been others that have walked the path before me that provided insight, information, and training to me. But then I had to take that and to apply it, to test it, and then to build my own method to engaging. Um, I had an opportunity, so you saw that I had the privilege. It really was the privilege to participate in both Allies Refuge and Allies Welcome. Those are the 2 named operations for the evacuation of Afghans from Afghanistan as the Taliban resumed power there
Hmm.
uh, in the early 2020s. And then Allies Welcome, as we and other nations, we weren't the only one, the United States being the we in this case, as we welcomed tens of thousands of Afghans into our country. And as I participated in those operations, what the resounding challenge, like and it was something that we saw over and over and over again, to the point where we actually built some training and helped the folks that were.
All right, we're back.
There it is. Well,
So
that's either what editing is for, or it demonstrates our ability to operate on the fly, right?
yeah.
Um,
Sorry.
so so in my story, where I am basically is we're doing this operation to, one, to evacuate Afghans from Afghanistan, and two, to then welcome tens of thousands of them into the United States. And what we found over and over again as part of the acculturation team is that the preponderance of the people that were working to bring these Afghans into the country had never interacted with Afghans before, and so they didn't know how to interact with them. And things that are very common in the United States that they wouldn't think twice about were actually barriers to good communication with them. And so this is where, in the wisdom of the leadership team that we had, they provided me resources to build and then train the folks that were interacting with the Afghans to help process them into the country, to help them better understand how to do that in a way that would be well received. Because the reality is that those Afghans were in a very stressful situation, right? They were in a place that they didn't know. Many of them in around a language they didn't understand. The food was foreign. Everything about, maybe not everything, but so much of what they were experiencing was foreign. And so I looked at those leaders as being intelligent enough to understand that they didn't know everything, and then to say, well, we have a team of people that can do that. Go do that, and do that for us, and do that on our behalf. And so those difficult leadership challenges happened when two people that maybe, for example, thought that they understood what was going on, or had experience in how things worked for them, had different outcomes of their previous experience. And so we were challenged with, how do we address it? How do we address the situation when we both have experience that got us to this point? We both progressed positively in our careers and are seen as trusted advisors, but we disagree. And it's in those instances, right, that the real act of leadership, I think, comes out, because sometimes the best leaders are followers, and other times the best leaders are servants, and sometimes the best leaders are decisive leaders from the front. They're shepherds. And so every instance has to be identified and evaluated separately. But I will say that in that instance in particular, with working the acculturation team, and then working the plan, and then executing that plan, all three of those things were important. Sometimes on the things that were not really important, you got to let them go and demonstrate that you're willing to listen to people and to take feedback and to not have to make every decision. Sometimes you have to be forceful, and sometimes you just have to be accepting. And so I was definitely, it was an honor to serve with them, and to serve and to do that mission. And I learned a lot about me and about how I lead, especially when I disagree, through that experience.
And were many of your conversations in the native language, their native tongue?
So that they were. In fact, that was one of the things that we really worked hard to do, was to give them a voice and to provide the Afghans a way where they could make decisions, right? So the same is true in many instances in life, right? When we have traumatic experience, regardless of the trauma, we often find that people become more reserved, but it's because and sometimes they can demonstrate frustration, anger, and anxiety, and all of these things. At least the literature that I've read, maybe not all of them, but much of it is tied to the fact that someone has taken something from them, and they feel like they've lost some control of something they've had control of in their life before. And so working hard to reestablish a system where that person or those people have some level of control back in their lives is so critical to moving past that trauma. Right? Whether it's in this instance, right, we're talking about people that have been displaced. quite literally moved halfway around the world
Yeah.
and put in a new place, right? So to give them a choice of what they were going to eat, to give them a choice of what clothes they were going to wear, when they would worship, these were choices that we could give them. I couldn't give them choices of how many beds they had in their room. And I couldn't give them a choice of, I couldn't give them total freedom of movement, right? Because we brought all of these services onto a military installation for the most part. And I couldn't let them leave the base, but I could give them that freedom of movement on the base itself, right? And so to give people back some level of control, especially after trauma, was really important to them. And that was one of the lessons that I took away and brought back into my leadership system, right? When I went back to command, was I realized that that's what my subordinates needed as well. Mm-hmm. Is that they needed to feel like there were aspects of the work that we were doing that were in their control solely to execute. And when we empowered them, right, and I'll use this phrase because it's and anyone who's listening to this in the Space Force will recognize this from our doctrine documents, is that we should empower our subordinates to recognize good ideas, to take appropriate risk, and to learn from failure. These are three essential aspects of giving control to someone else. And what I found was that our organization succeeded more when more people had control. And so I definitely got out of the attitude, not that I had gotten into the attitude of doing it, but I definitely established a system where I pushed control to the lowest level possible, and decision making and command to the lowest level possible, because they all had great ideas as well. And because of that, our team flourished.
That's amazing.
It was a whole lot of words, and I sort of bounced all over the place, and I apologize for that.
I love it, man.
But it's all together, right?
I could listen to your stories all day. I'm truly fascinated by each of them and all the things you've done. What are some other moments in your career that really stand out for you, where maybe you learned a ton or you were just moved emotionally a ton? What are some of those?
So we were in Afghanistan. I'll give one example, and then I'll sort of give some examples of how it touches other things. Mm-hmm. When I was in Afghanistan in 2015, my team were the first responders to a downed helicopter. And afterward, it was fairly emotional. What happened? We actually had a team member that was going home that day, and he was supposed to be on that helicopter, on that convoy of helicopters. And so we had skin in the game, we thought, to recover one of our own. And it was really emotional. And my team as a whole, learned something that day about who were fighters, who were fleers, and who were freezers, right? So we talk about those natural responses that we all have, which, by the way, I will tell you that everyone has a natural response, and it's really, really hard, if not impossible, to change what that natural response is. And so for those that are listening that struggle with that, and to my teammates that were there with us who struggle with it still, it's not something that you become, it's something that you are. And so don't embrace what you are and learn how to make that what you do. But I had one member on my team in particular that really struggled with the fact that when this happened and we had to grab our gear and we had to go to the helicopter, we had to go to the down convoy, the helicopter convoy. He froze to the point where he didn't make it to go and to do the thing with the things. And afterward, as we were talking, he was like, back home, my team looks to me to be the fighter, to be the one that rushes to the challenge. But today I just froze. It's like, and I don't know how to take that. And so we spent a lot of time as a team debriefing or unpackaging what that means, and identifying that it's okay that that's who he was. And there were ways that he could contribute in a future situation, right? So the person that freezes, maybe they don't need to be the one that runs to the fire. Maybe they're the ones that are in the background making the phone calls or hopping on the radio in this instance, right? Doing other things to positively contribute. But he needed to learn that lesson about himself. Just like the other members of my team, many of whom had responded in such a way that they needed to know what they were as well in an actual stressful situation where lives were absolutely on the line and where we had to just go and do, or to stay back and respond in another way. And so, application. So for the broader application of this story is that I think that we all need moments of stress in our lives where we can gauge where we are and who we are. Because our response in that moment, in some instances, can be learned and can progress over time, but there are others that are just who we are. That gentleman in particular is a very compassionate, very capable man. And in future instances that we identified that that's who he was, that he was not going to be the one to run right into the fire or run right into the firefight, but he was going to be the guy that we could have in the back, making the phone calls and prepping the equipment for the people that were moving back and forth, right? And so we learned how to bring him into the team. And so understanding that about him understanding that about him, and us understanding that about him provided a way for us to keep him included, to include him instead of exclude him from action that we needed to take. And in today's society, especially in a world that is increasingly more specialized, and for my children who will eventually listen to this message is for you. It is okay to grow where you are, and to stand and to lift where you stand, and to be who you are, and to find a way to be meaningfully employed in whatever you're doing where you are. And in so doing, you empower your team, you keep a team united and moving all in the same direction. When you find ways to stress people, yes, but to stress them and then to utilize them in a way where they can grow. And so from a leader's perspective, it's so important to understand that you don't get always to choose your team, but you got to use every bit of it, because the only way you succeed is by using everything you have at your disposal.
Absolutely. I've been lucky enough to be in management roles and have to figure out the different personalities and how I can utilize that, and how certain people can speak up for certain things or maybe take over in these instances, right? And
Sure.
That's all coming to mind as you're saying all this, but it's so amazing what you learn there in your positions, in your role, in your deployments, and the interactions you have, and what you've seen firsthand of stuff that's really, at the end of the day, it could be life or death with what you've been involved with. And that's the truest stress test if there ever was one, right? You really get to know how somebody is at that point, right? And you really have to learn how to use that moving forward. And I have so many friends that were in the military, and some still are. And some of their stories, to me, I couldn't even imagine being in the positions they were in, and how they're living that civilian life now after going through the things they went through, So
Sure.
we really have to realize, too, that everybody has stuff they're battling and dealing with and internally struggling with, right? And we need to take a step back sometimes to get in there emotionally to understand them, rather than just see it for what it is, right? There's usually a lot more to the story, so to speak. But what I'm curious, because I know you're a big Star Wars, Star Trek fan. You pointed out the reference, the podcast that you were on a couple of years ago. You referenced it too. What was it like in the Space Force? And at the time you were in, what were some of the initiatives? And how close are we to really getting to a point of, hey, sci-fi is here now and here to stay, and the sky's the limit, so to speak?
Sure. Well, so
I mean, some of the stuff you worked on is probably classified, right? So
Sure. That's not a problem to talk about that. Or it is a problem to talk about classified, but it's not a problem to just talk about the Space Force in general. I'm sort of caging my thoughts here because I could say so much. I personally believe that our Space Force is moving in the right direction, but it takes time to come out from obscurity and to be the service that we want to be, right? The United States Army has had hundreds of years, right, to develop the culture and the lessons learned and the meaning, like the meaningful bits that empower people and that produce positive results. Hundreds of years. We've had hundreds of days, so we're moving at a pace, and I believe it's an appropriate pace, but we're not where we need to be yet. The Space Force, to toe the party line, right? So the Space Force is designed to do three things: to preserve freedom of action in, from, and to space, to provide independent options to decision makers, and to increase joint lethality and effectiveness. All of these things really focus on how we as a service protect U.S. and in many instances, if not most instances, I would advocate that we protect human interest in space. But it's all Earth focused, right? It's all Earth focused, or at most those geostationary bands that are like 60,000 kilometers away from the Earth, right? But to give you context, that's only a third of the distance to the moon, right? And the moon is the closest celestial body that we have to us, and even that is very, very close to us relative to the other planets in our own solar system, right? And so I think that the future of the Space Force really does not have a limit. I don't believe that it does. I believe it begins here. I like where the United States is. I very much appreciate that very wise leaders many years ago, right? Many years ago, separated the peaceful, and this is where Star Trek has a reference, because Star Trek was about the peaceful exploration of space for all kind, right? And there are lots of different races, but for humankind in specific, right? Because that's who it's really focusing on. Yep. I believe that there's something very real in that for how we ought to move forward. And the United States has done that from the very beginning. The NASA, so the National Aeronautic and Space Administration, is about the propagation of space as a peaceful place for scientific advancement and for expansion for the human endeavor. Mm-hmm. It's only when we introduce humans into things, though, that we have to defend it, right? Because the reality is, and by the way, this is very true in space, there are places where we can operate and there are places that we can't. So unlike what you've seen in science fiction movies, we do not have the ability to infinitely move in any direction. It is not like dogfighting and above terra firma movement in space. And so there are some physical realities that limit how we move in space that are a fleeting resource. Location, distance, all of these things play a part in how things operate in space. And because of that, and you understand this, in one of your previous endeavors, that location means a lot into what people are willing to expend their resources on, right? Mm-hmm. And the same is true in space. And so as a Space Force, I really do believe that we work diligently to protect that peaceful propagation of space for all, with an understanding that when words fail, sometimes something a little bit stronger is necessary. And that's been the joy of what I've seen so far working as a military advisor, at the State Department, is that I already am seeing how it is that our senior political leaders, who, by the way, are the ones that if the Department of Defense is the head, then the State Department is the neck and the shoulders, and it tells the head where to look, right? The State Department, because it is working with these other nations in a way that doesn't always end with the firing of producing kinetic effects against another sovereign nation. They have ways of doing things that I believe have extreme merit and that walk us away from that precipice of conflict. And it's really been an honor in the few days that I've only worked with them a few days, but in the few days that I have worked with them, to see the way that they do that. So it's pretty amazing. And so I think that we will continue to see the entirety of human endeavor in space, but the sky really is the limit as we continue to progress for the benefit of all mankind, or all humankind.
Okay. And then when we talk about the human effect of it all, and what do you think the international relations in the world, where do you think it's at? What kind of state are we in right now as far as international relations? And what comes to mind is China, Russia, and us, right? What do you see happening here, and what can happen, and what are you hopeful for?
So I think in the end, we'll just have to see. I believe that I don't believe. Okay, I'll say it this way. I got a good way to say this. I believe that people in Russia and people in China and people in the United States, people are basically the same. We wake up in the morning. Yeah. We work in the best interest of ourselves and of those that are closest to us, those that we would consider our family, those we would consider our friends, and those we would consider our communities, right? As we build those circles, right? We're talking about Simon Sinek's circles of family, right? So as you build out those circles, right, the farther we get from them, the less effort we spend on them. But I think that every single person, regardless of where they live, regardless of what language they speak or their cultural background, works in that way every day. Mm-hmm. It just so happens that the systems for China, for Russia, and the United States often come at ends with each other. And because of the way that our nations have expanded over time, the limited resources that we use to drive the world we live in often come in competition between us. And so as we move towards peaceful sharing or prioritization of resources, I think that we move peacefully where those can't be prioritized with money or with effort or with proximity. Sometimes it comes to violence. And so I don't believe anyone in the military looks to violence. But in fact, as a man of faith, I believe that there is extreme merit in being a peacemaker first. But the reality is that there is a time and a place for all things. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. And so there does come a time where what is right has to be defended, even if it means at the cost of human life, because the opposite is even less tolerable than the loss of life in the short term. So,
yeah, well spoken there. I 100% agree, and it's funny because I've been able to travel different parts of the world, meet people from China, from Russia, from the other places in the world that have dictators or whatever, but yeah, they're just people. They're amazing, right? And then when you get to the politics of it all, that's when everybody's trying to find the newest best thing or the resources, like you stated
sure.
there, and oftentimes that does lead to those conflicts, and for us to be the one kind of looking over the world, so to speak, that puts us in a position that's extremely stressful, and it makes you wonder what's going to happen in the future. Especially right now, it seems like things boil up, at least, in the news. I don't pay attention to the news too much, but a lot of people get worked up by that. And there's so many moving parts behind the scenes that are at work trying to do these peaceful negotiations and really trying to make it easy for everybody to live and live their day to day, right? So, it is one of those things we'll have to wait and see, like you said, but somebody that's probably firsthand hearing these conversations, I just wanted to see your take on it.
Sure.
It's a very, very good answer from you.
Thank you very much. Let me recommend a movie to you and
All right.
to your listeners. You have to be careful because there's a modern version of this movie, and then there's an old black and white version of this movie. So if you like Keanu Reeves and Jennifer Connelly, then watch the more recent one for a more modern take on it. But I prefer the black and white one. The movie is called The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Okay,
And for my Star Wars fans, or for those Star Wars fans that listen to this, you may recognize the phrase that the main protagonist uses as the names of some characters that were woven into the Star Wars universe. Because, sci-fi is sci-fi. But in this movie, and I'll be really, really quick about it, it's about an alien that comes and lands in New York City and has a message. He's an ombudsman for a global or an interstellar consortium of races, and they've come to Earth because Earth has just harnessed the power of the atom, which means that it's not very long before they can begin to travel between the stars. And so this alien comes to basically talk to the world about the peaceful use of technology moving forward because they've now crossed a new threshold. But the United States doesn't want him to speak with everyone. They want him to speak to just the president first. And his message is very apropos to this conversation. He goes, "The message that I have is for all, because you are all one race." And I think that's where we're going to get. So in my heart of hearts, I believe that as we extend past where we are, we will find a way. We will, out of necessity, because that same technology that will take us to the farthest reaches of the things that we can see and comprehend, the things that will ultimately lead to our infinite potential as human beings, will also have the same power to destroy the very life that we all want to perpetuate. And so we'll have to make a decision. We'll have to. And so that's the point of that movie, regardless of which version you watch. It's a little bit more clear in the black and white one, but the black and white version of it from the 50s. But I would recommend it to anyone who wants to really consider what that looks like and to see how that character and how that author really goes about solving this problem.
Well, I love sci-fi, so I'm most definitely going to check it out.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that right now.
So watch both. Watch both of them, and seriously, shoot me a line.
I feel like I've seen the more recent one. When did that come out?
Oh gosh, I don't know. It may have been 10 years ago.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, I think I saw it when it came out, so I vaguely remember it. But
yeah, Jennifer Connelly was in a couple of movies at the time. She was in Hulk and a couple of others.
Yeah, definitely. But the 50s version, I didn't even know there was one. So definitely going to check that out.
It's fantastic.
I trust you on that. And you mentioned aliens. Now, I was hoping you'd actually mention something like that so I could ask this question.
Sure.
UFOs. Have you seen any evidence of it? And what do you think about alien life in general?
Okay, so I'll say it this way. When I was the commander of the 319th Combat Training Squadron, we taught a class about UFOs, about unidentified flying objects. Right. And people loved coming and listening to it. It wasn't a class as much as it was like a seminar. But people would come and see this because they're like, "Oh my gosh, is someone going to talk about aliens?" What we did was it was a way to get people in the door, because the reality is that there are things that we see around us all the time that we don't understand what they are. They're unidentified to us. So the purpose of that seminar was actually to talk about well, what can we characterize about what we see, and what can't we characterize, right? So I'm sort of side angling this a little bit.
Yeah.
The reality is that there are definitely things that I've seen in my life that I don't understand, and that are unidentified to me. And
Has there been stuff you've been involved with that is related to this that you're not supposed to talk about?
So how about this? If there was, then just me saying that I can't talk about it would be an admission or a denial of it. And so,
True.
if you recall, you remember the movie Independence Day?
Of course.
Right?
One of my favorites.
So when it's a fantastic, right? By the way, that was like the first movie that I saw in a big theater with like all the surround sound stuff, right? Anyways.
Oh yeah.
So if you recall in that movie, right? So the president is in Air Force One, and they're flying, and Jeff Goldblum's father is talking about that thing, Area 51, which by the way was actually a classified location when that movie was released. Still, if I recall correctly, it's not anymore, right? I mean, they had the Storm Area 51 thing on social media a few years ago, where there were like hundreds of thousands, not thousands of people that said they were going to storm the defenses there. I remember. But anyways, you get to a point where the head of the National Security Council says, well, actually there is this place, right? Because for instance, there's nothing like that. And he goes, that's not entirely accurate, right? And so the president goes, which part? And then you got a scene cut, right? So the point is, there's nothing that I could say one way or the other if I had seen something. But the reality is that I'm a believer. You know what the Fermi paradox is? The Fermi paradox is the discussion of if there is alien life, why haven't we seen it yet? And the apologists of the Fermi paradox say, well, we just haven't found a sensor where we can, or we've received the information, we just don't know how to interpret it. I believe that with an infinite galaxy, there has to be other intelligent life.
Yeah.
Will we ever encounter it? I don't know. As a man of faith, I believe that there is, because what are aliens but extraterrestrials, right? If they don't live here, then they are extraterrestrials by definition. So I believe there is something more. But what that means, I don't know. Is it a multiverse? I don't know. Is it far distant humanoid type beings? I don't know. But I sure hope that there's something more than just this.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. Most of us probably.
Yeah, and I believe that one way or the other, whether you're a person of faith or not, humankind and us as individuals will at some point understand what that means.
Yeah, and with technology advancing the way it does, and like you said, you got multiple devices you use on a daily basis now. What are some of the threats you're seeing moving forward with technology?
Well, probably the biggest one that I personally am fearful of, and I actually experienced this yesterday during my workout, is the fact that because of specialization and because of how people monetize what they do, when they build apps or programs or web pages, there are people that are very good at exploiting information and exploiting the data that we give freely every single day, right? I mean, the fact of the matter is that you and I are not in the same location, and this is being broadcast. And even though it's supposedly end-to-end encrypted, there's probably somebody out there that can be watching our conversation in real time. There probably is. And so I believe that one of our biggest challenges is how do we mix the human endeavor with technology, because we may inadvertently do something that causes destruction, right? I mean, it's very apropos that there's a movie Oppenheimer coming out, right?
I can't wait for that one. Yeah.
When they were testing nuclear weapons, like, it's very, very true that those scientists, there was honestly a concern that by igniting that hydrogen bomb, that they were going to ignite all of the atmosphere and everything living on the planet was going to be incinerated. But they had to make a choice, and they made a choice, right? And so I think that I think that probably the biggest threat that we have is the creation of a technology that we truly cannot understand, that that will be to a significant detriment to us.
And do you think artificial intelligence will have something to do with that?
I'm a fan of Terminator, just like everybody else. Arnold Schwarzenegger in the '80s. Are you joking me?
Yeah,
Right?
classic.
Classic.
Yeah.
So artificial intelligence is an interesting topic. I will defer to people that are much more intelligent than I, on where we go with that. I'm a personally a believer that we ought to develop machines and machine learning that allows the human brain to do what the human brain does best, and then let the gonculation of data, like the compiling of data or the analysis of pixels on a screen or bruises on tomatoes, right? To give some examples of how that's AI does that now, right? Let technology do those things, and then allow the human mind to do what it does best,
Mm-hmm.
which is to make sense of the data that it receives, if it can receive true data, right? Actionable
Mm-hmm.
information. And so hopefully decision makers and policymakers are willing to find that balance. I'm going to pontificate for a second and share a story with you.
All right.
When I was in college, I switched from computer science to sociology.
Mm.
And one day I was having
That's quite a change, by the way. Like,
yeah, it's part of the reason why it took me like 7 years to get through college.
Fair
And I'm not a
enough.
doctor, right? Another movie reference there. But I had this great conversation with a theologian, because I was studying Karl Marx and Max Weber, and it was at this point where I'm really jumping into some really deep thoughts, right? And so we were talking about this and about capitalism and all these things, and he asks me this question. He's like, "So do you believe that there should be no limits on the pursuit of capital?" And at this point, I was probably studying Adam Smith and doing some other things. Like, I think, and obviously I'm mixing a little bit of the socio and the economic that's here, but Karl Marx wrote probably one of the best treatises on capitalism ever before he wrote the Communist Manifesto. But anyways, at the time, I was like, no, I think that you could do this without limits and just allow the market to drive itself, right? Allow human endeavor to drive itself wherever it's going to go. Basically, this idea that you can get to a total anarchy and we'll survive. So then he baited me so hard, right? And he goes, all right, well then, Adam, I've got a question for you. Do you, and hopefully this doesn't flag in a bad way when you post this. If it does, you can pull this whole section. But he goes, well then, what are your thoughts about child pornography? Should it be allowed? It's like, because there's obviously a market for it. Should it be allowed if people are willing to pay a price for it? And at that point, he got me good, right? Because I'm like, well, no, I don't believe that that's appropriate at all. I think that people that pursue that they have a horrible addiction that is very destructive, not just for themselves but to others. It's exploitive. It's a bad thing. There's nothing redeeming at all about it.
Right.
And he goes, well, if you're a believer in allowing everything, as long as there's a market for it, then you have to be willing to accept that would be acceptable. It was at that point I had to reevaluate what it was that I was thinking, right? Because I do believe that there are limits that we have to place on ourselves for the good of all. And that really is the human experiment. And that is what separates us from so much of the rest of the animal kingdom that lives very anarchic, and that's okay for them. The difference is that it's not okay for us, because we have the ability to create and destroy in ways that no other species on the planet does. And maybe, at least as far as we can see, maybe in the broader context of of a galaxy or a universe. We might be unique in that ability. And so with that comes an extreme level of responsibility. So to quote Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, right? With great power comes great responsibility. And what we've been blessed with incurs and comes with it a cost, and that cost is accountability and responsibility. So I think that AI, sort of back to the point now that I've tangented off, I'm going to spool it back real quick. Artificial intelligence, we have to be very careful with.
Yeah.
Because once we create something that we cannot completely understand, or if it can create itself, then we've moved into a new phase where we may have to combat the very creations that we make. And that may or may not fare well for us.
I hear you, especially after watching all the sci-fi we've watched. It's like, holy
Yeah,
crap,
right?
all these things are possible, you know.
That's right.
But no, I want to get to some other questions that I think could relate to the audience, or people listening or watching to this. You're a father of 6. You're a husband. You work, I would say, probably a stressful job, but you're like one of the happiest, coolest guys I know. So the way you're able to handle that and be the way you are is so impressive. So what advice would you give to the people raising kids out there in society these days? Because your kids, you said, are ages 6 through 17. They're in between those ages, right?
Yep, 7 to 17, that's right.
Or 7 to 17. What kind of advice would you give some of the audience here on raising their kids in society these days, and maybe handling what's coming, what's here, and what, I don't know, what type of advice would you give them? Because I'm not a parent myself, so I just want to hear this for my audience.
You have to prioritize your family. Because the reality is, if your children don't learn it from you, they either won't learn it, or they'll learn it from someone else. Right? Simple example from yesterday. We just moved across the country, and one of my daughters, my oldest daughter's books from her high school, one of her school books, got packed up instead of returned to school. And so we found it yesterday in one of the boxes we were unpacking, or late last week. And so I gave her an envelope to put the book in, and she didn't know how to address an envelope because she's never sent anything herself. Well, apart from an indictment on me as a human, as an adult who has a 17-year-old who's never addressed an envelope completely by herself, or that she can recall, I had to ask myself, well, what other things does she need as she prepares to leave our home that we haven't taught her yet? And so to answer your question, for people that are raising children, remember that they are not little adults. They are children. And that if you're not teaching it to them, then they will either not learn it, or they'll learn it from someone else. And while you can't teach them everything, you can prioritize the things that are most important. And so figure out what that is and teach it to your children, because that's what they're going to remember about you. Is they're going to remember the way that you were with them, about the experiences that they had with you, and the things that they learned from you. Just like I've already shared, stories about my parents with you just in the last 90 minutes or so. And so that's the advice I'd give.
Yeah, sticks with you. Absolutely. And moving forward, let's talk about that. You're in this new role. What types of conversations will you be involved with, and what are you hoping to accomplish in the new role?
So I have no idea what kind of conversations I'm so new that I don't know what I don't know, and I'm okay admitting that. Ideally, or if I close my eyes and I'm right, so I'm talking about envisioning what I see myself doing. I believe a part of what I'll be doing is interacting with, or supporting. I won't be me interacting. I'll be in a supporting role to a senior member of the State Department. He will be talking with international partners about how we continue to get along and work together. I look forward to doing that. I enjoy that aspect. I've enjoyed that aspect of my career to this point and look forward to that moving forward. How much of it I get, how much of it I do, I don't know. But it's definitely something that I've enjoyed in the past and look forward to doing it in the future.
And as a natural progression, like all of your career, what's next for you beyond this role? And is there any other aspirations you have? Because you're still a young guy. I mean, what's up there for you? I know you got some big goals and dreams that you know, it could be that big, hairy, audacious one you want to tell me about, or the ones that you just see a little bit more attainable, right? So, what are some of those for you?
Well, let's see. So probably next for me, I'm hoping that this detail with the State Department leads me back to the Space Force to work the other side of that, right? So the place where I work in the State Department deals pretty heavily with policy and international policy, and the Space Force has something like that as well. So I hope that this primes me for that for a future role doing that. After that, who knows? I mean, I've been in the military long enough that I can actually retire from the military in a few years, which leads to, well, what other aspirations do I have? I've told my wife that when I'm done working for the federal government, I intend to do no more days of meaningful work for anyone but her.
I love it.
So we'll, whether that's the end of my military career or there's a few more years, it's very convenient that 30 years in the workforce gets us to our youngest graduating from high school. So there's probably meaningful service. There's probably meaningful work for another 10 or 12 years. But after that, who knows? I mean, I've had dreams of, you know, being a politician or being an ambassador. I can visualize myself doing nothing but owning a game store in some small, you know, in some college community, or, you know, being doing real estate and just owning rental properties. The most recent one, the one that I find the most appealing, at least in the current moment, is buying some land and building it to be a place where people can go and do retreats, like get back out into nature. And I would build it in such a way that for those who want to really rough it, they can rough it. But those that need a refrigerator and a freezer and a stove, so that they can make food and survive and enjoy nature, but still have some of those comforts that they can experience at home, to have that available as well. So to run that gamut from camping to glamping, if you want to call it that, right? But to have that spectrum, but to have a place where people can do that, because those places are becoming fewer and fewer. I find a lot of meaning in that, and so maybe that's what I end up doing. Maybe maybe in retirement I'm just gonna actually settle down, like when I grow up. So we'll see.
I love it. And that's one of my recent passions too, is checking out more of the national parks within the states. We have so many beautiful places. Yeah. I grew up going to the Caribbean and going elsewhere, when in all reality we got so many beautiful things to see and places here that we can travel to. So I'm looking forward to that. So Zion National Park, Yellowstone, Glacier, Grand Tetons, Acadia in Maine, and some of these other national parks I plan to visit here in the near future. But are there any places around the world you haven't been yet that you're looking forward to see?
You know, I would really enjoy seeing sub-Saharan Africa. I've never been there.
Yeah.
I've never been to Japan. And my wife, I think that she would actually come with me if I went to Japan for work. But if I don't go there for work, I probably need to take her at some point. I've seen some really beautiful places in Asia. I've seen some really beautiful places in Europe. I've seen some beautiful places in in the Americas. And so one thing that never ceases to amaze me is the diversity of the nature that we find around us, and the diversity of the cultures that develop around it. And so any opportunity to see something new or to experience something new, I would jump at.
Yeah, those are two very high on my list. What you said about Africa and then Japan, those are up there. And recently, last year, I got to go to places around Europe and just see the different cultures and hear the different languages. And it's also beautiful and amazing to me, right? And at the end of the day, like you were saying earlier, we're all just people. You know, everybody
Right.
enjoys similar things and cares about similar things. And at the end of the day, embrace that, love that, you know, and it's awesome to meet these people. They might not know a lick of English, but they're still enjoying being around you, right? And I don't know their
Exactly.
language, and they still enjoy that. So it's so fun. It was so fun to see and experience, and you've had those experiences yourself. And how many different languages do you speak?
Well, so I've studied
Study.
5 different languages.
Okay.
I don't think I can speak all of those languages anymore. I used some Dari last week. Went and visited a friend. I still speak Norwegian fairly well, and I have a
Wow.
decent working knowledge, at least understanding of German. So those would be the ones that I would say that I actually still have working knowledge of. But I studied Arabic and Russian when I was in college as well. So those would be the ones that I would say that I have some working knowledge of.
Do you have any inspiring or amazing quotes in any of those languages that you could share that come to the top of your head?
Sure. I'm a fan of idiomatic phrases, right?
Let's
So
go.
those cliche phrases, right? So
It's a
I'll
great
give
way
you
to
one
end
from-
this here, by the way. So this
Yeah,
would be great.
I got it. So
Keep
so
going.
here it goes. The one in Dari that I really like is Dil ba dil radara, and it means the way is made heart to heart. So it speaks to how it is that we grow and how it is that we interact with people. Is that we really do make pathways from person to person as we go heart to heart. I really, really like that one. And then in Norwegian, there's a great expression. It's actually just a word, but it's stopo. And it sounds exactly like it is. It's this empowering phrase, and it means to stand steadfast. It's like hold the line, stopo. But it means a lot more than that too. It's this idea that no matter what happens, like stand, and it's going to be okay. So there are two.
I love it. That's perfect. And Adam, it's been a true pleasure, man. This has been amazing for me, for the audience, I'm sure, and just an inspiring journey you took me through here. And it's one of these things I'll remember forever, man. You taking the time here today, and I can't wait to meet you in person. We haven't met in person yet, but one of these days we'll hopefully make it happen. And I don't mind coming to DC to see you, man. You're just a drive away, okay? I'm here in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Well,
Not too far now.
listen, I got family in North Carolina. We'll make this work.
All right.
We'll make this work.
Looking forward to it, man. Would love to meet you halfway, meet you here, meet you there, whatever it is.
Sure.
But truly thankful for this moment, and it's been a pleasure. And so honored by your presence here today. And it's just another way for me to get motivated, man. And I appreciate that. And if people want to reach out, I mean, are you active on LinkedIn or anything, or any?
I am. I
people
have
questions?
I have a LinkedIn account. That's probably the best way.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried my hand at other social media platforms to very little success. So LinkedIn is probably a good way. It's just Adam Howland. You can tell that it's me because there's a B-2 bomber, the big plane, the big wing bomber in the background. That's my picture. Feel free to reach out.
Okay. And actually, last question, you made me think, because you've been around so many different types of aircraft, I'm sure, right? What's maybe your favorite you've been in?
Oh gosh. Actually, it's the UH-60 helicopter. It's not actually a plane. I love the UH-60.
Interesting.
It's such a versatile machine.
Okay. And what, I mean, if you wanted to go a little bit more in depth about it, what makes it so interesting to you?
Well, what makes it interesting is that it can be used. It it's an all-purpose helicopter. I mean, there are helicopters that are designed for attack. There are helicopters that are designed for transport. This one is designed to do a little bit of both. And so, as one who considers himself to be a jack of many trades but a master of none, the UH-60 and I can get along in that way.
All right, and last thing, do you see yourself getting a pilot's license and having one of these aircraft one day?
Oh my gosh. If I could purchase a UH-60, that would be crazy. But a private pilot's license, absolutely.
Perfect, man. I'm looking forward to hearing stories about the future endeavors and everything you're involved with, and hearing stories about your family and what they end up doing. I'm sure your kids are amazing, like yourself, and your wife as well. And I just can't wait to hopefully meet everybody one day. And once again, thank you, man, and have a great rest of your day.
Likewise. See you later. Right here.
I've been chasing all these dreams, I'm getting very close. Your work shouldn't feel like work if you really love it. If you set and you know your worth, then think if it's worth it. But I do count my blessings first, so you know I'm grateful every night. But watch me, baby, I'ma take it there. Tell ya I'ma stay the path. Tell ya I've been chasing all these dreams, I'm getting very close. Here we go.